Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views we hope are relevant to you. In today's show, we report on the ongoing and shocking pollution killing Punjabi's Sikhs as they take to the streets in protest. India continues its soft war overseas as it deliberately instills fear and division amongst its diaspora in Canada. Meanwhile, a Sikh MP raises public concerns about British Sikhs continuing to be targeted as they travel through the country's airports under anti-terrorism laws. And we remember the Sikh security guard recently murdered in Edmonton in Canada. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers. I hope you had a wonderful weekend, and thanks for joining us bright and early on this Monday.
Indeed, and James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we'll take a look at loads of your great comments which have been filling up below the video, so thank you as always for those. Right, James, let's get things going. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
This morning, we are going to take a look at a couple of stories that in a way are related, and we will talk about how India is using these stories of 3 deaths of students in Canada to instill more fear and anxiety amongst the students. Now, of course, we know that there are approximately 400,000 students from India that are in Canada studying a range of courses from technology and cybersecurity through to business administration, medical fields, and so forth. So, of course, we know that there are a lot of Indians here in Canada. And with that, of course, there have been 3 deaths of Indian national students that are here as foreign permits for getting their education. Now, unfortunately, it has been a horrible start to December for the student ratio or the student body. 3 students have been killed across Canada. There are no indications that in any way were they related to race, religion, or other targeting due to them being minorities and immigration status. Instead, what we have are a group of individuals that were in different areas of the country. One here in British Columbia. The young lady was actually out with friends at a bonfire, having some kind of a celebration, when all of a sudden a tree came down and actually crushed the poor lady. She was a young student, again here from India, and she lost her life. She was not able to be revived, and that is, of course, one of the instances that we're talking about. Now, the other tragic deaths that we have are a student in Guelph, I believe it was, Ontario, and he had a dispute with his roommate. A fight broke out, and the roommate grabbed a knife and stabbed him to death. So, of course, a very violent and unnecessary death, and no death, especially of an innocent individual in Canada, no matter what their immigration study status or anything else, should be tolerated in our society. And all Canadians extend our heartfelt condolences to all of the families. What we don't like is seeing that India is using these deaths to actually try to instill fear, anxiety, and other separation within the community, calling them reporting in the India media that these were violent and targeted due to race. Now, the External Affairs Ministry spokesperson, who is Randhir Jaswal from India, said safety, security, and welfare of Indian nationals in Canada remains of utmost importance. And it should not go unsaid that Canada believes the exact same thing, that there is absolutely no room in our country for violence against others. So again, this is not something that Canadians take lightly. We are very concerned of any acts of violence against another within the Canadian borders. And the Canadian authorities have acted very swiftly to arrest and to charge the individuals involved in these other 2 deaths. Now, India is reporting that all 3 were violent and targeted attacks and that they were racially motivated. motivated, but this is not the case. As I said, one person was squashed by a tree, and as far as I know, no trees have been taken into custody at this point, and there's no sign that there was racially motivated hate by that tree. But let's take a look at the other two. As I said, the one individual was stabbed after a fight with his roommate. That was a very tragic and preventable action that should never have taken place. As the details are being withheld at this time, as the preliminary investigation continues, and in Canada, as the charges progress through the courts, the police continue the investigation, so they don't just forward it to the Crown Council, sit back and wait for the trial to happen. They continue very aggressively and actively investigating these deaths. Now, the other individual, this was a Sikh individual, which I'll cover in my second story, from Punjab, who was a security guard, giving selflessly of himself to the community, and he was violently murdered in his position as a security guard. As I said, we'll talk more about this individual a bit later, but that story, I'm not going to go into details about the violence itself, but more in honoring this individual. But in any event, as I said, the India government is using this now to really pit anxiety and anger towards Canada. And again, rightfully so to a certain point, but I really get angry when there is a movement to politicize the violence against anyone, especially foreign students who come to this country. They should feel safe. They should feel welcome, just like every other citizen of this country. We should all be safe, whether you are a citizen, a visitor, a student, whatever the case is. So again, with that said, we want to make sure that we reach out to all people of all faiths, of all countries who are here in Canada. If you feel unsafe, if you are experiencing any type of harassment, bullying, racism, make sure to report it. These individuals who are getting away with it may take it a step further later on. So when you report it, at least there's a record and things can get going in terms of correcting that behavior before it becomes something to this level. But again, these crimes were not hate motivated. They were not racially motivated. They were not motivated due to immigration status. So again, even the Conservative Party of Canada is trying to use these recent acts of violence as a political soapbox to stand up and use it to try to gain favor with the Canadian public. But again, there is no room for politicizing the tragic and untimely loss of any lives, especially these young lives with so much to give, so much to live for, and trying to make their lives for themselves and their families back home better. Angus, it's just terrible.
Should we be surprised? No, well, not in the least bit. This is how India operates. It's very clear that, and I referred to in the introduction, that they are waging a soft war, as well as a literal war against the Khalistan movement. But they are waging this soft war, which is essentially a war of information, a war of propaganda. It is a political war. They are deliberately sowing division and hate. This is how they operate. This is how they keep control. This is how they whip up the hatred against their enemies, of course, their enemies being the Sikh community. And they do this literally by manipulating their people. They do this domestically in India. Of course, the Godi media controls essentially the narrative across the whole Indian subcontinent. It means that if you are an Indian citizen, the only real media that you are exposed to is the Godi media, which means that you are only fed one narrative. It is very, very difficult if you live in India to find any other information because, of course, information from outside of India is strongly controlled. Likewise, Satellite, of course, we are banned, like many other channels. We're banned from broadcasting in India because they don't want Indians to get the other side of the story. They don't want the Indians, their population, to hear the truth, because if they found out the truth, the people would turn on their government and turn on them for doing essentially for following an agenda that is not in India's best interest. It is in the Brahmanical control's best interest. That's what it's all about. And of course that then spreads out to the diaspora. And the story here is very clear, is that the Sikh population have always been identified as an enemy of Brahmanical control of India. They realise that the Sikh community is one of the very few communities who firstly are awake to what's going on in India, and secondly pose a genuine threat to their control over India. That is why they target the Sikh community, because they fear the Sikh community. They are terrified of the Sikh community, and therefore they will use every possible thing in their power to ensure that their narrative dominates, that any Indian citizens and any Indian people in the diaspora hear only one narrative, so that their mindset, their decision making is based purely on what India tells them. And of course, it is very important, therefore, that they sow this hatred and this division so that they can control the narrative. And that is essentially what they're doing here. They've done what they have done right across social media, right across what they've done across mainstream media, is they cherry pick facts and they cherry pick situations and circumstances and spin those pieces of information into a narrative that suits their agenda. Their narrative is that Indians living in the diaspora are under threat. They are under threat from Sikh extremism, is one of their key narratives. They want Indians, ordinary Hindus, to fear Sikhs. That is what they do. They want to spread this narrative that the Sikhs pose a genuine threat, an existential threat to Hindus. Now, I mean, what nonsense this is. Hindus number over 1 billion people in India. Hindus are by far the dominant proportion of the diaspora. To say that the Sikhs pose an existential threat is a laugh, it's a joke, it's risible. Of course the Sikh community does not pose an existential threat to Hindus. This whole victimhood, this whole narrative that they are spreading even across the mainstream media is designed to say there is this deep, this terrible threat against Hindu, this Hindu phobia they call it. It's nonsense. Of course, Hindu phobia doesn't exist in any meaningful proportion in North America or in Europe or in the Southern Hemisphere. Of course it doesn't exist. But it exists in their minds, and they create this myth of Hindu phobia because they're trying to turn mainstream attention against their enemies, against the Sikh communities. That's what this is all about. And as we've pointed out again, once again, we pointed out the truth that some of these stories that they're referring to are this poor person, this victim of a falling tree. I mean, what a tragedy. And they're spinning that into a political argument, saying once again, it's all about Hindu phobia. They were a victim of Hindu phobia. Well, as you rightly said, James, I don't think this tree had any political leanings. It was sadly one of those just sad accidental tragedies that happens, but they turned it and managed to spin it into this narrative of Hindu phobia. So we've got to be awake to this. Of course, we're awake to this, but what matters is the Indian diaspora awake to this fact. Well, all we can do is keep broadcasting the truth, keep trying to inform and educate the diaspora amongst North America and Europe, saying, look, the truth is very different to what you are being told through social media, through these thousands of IT cells, these Hindutva IT cells that are spreading disinformation, fake news, misinformation, that you must instead try and seek out the truth. And that's why we exist, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And again, it is with very heartfelt condolences, we send our thoughts and our wishes out to the families, friends, and others that are connected to these victims, all three of them, regardless as to how they died. It's just a tragedy all the same. And as we reach out in that regard, I wanted to bring to you the story more closely in relation to one of the victims, a security guard who was 20 years old and had been in Edmonton, Alberta for just over a year and a half, or approximately that length of time. Now, this individual was a student studying business and business administration within the community of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And something that I looked at was the story that I'd been working on, and I decided to scrap that for tonight and move that to tomorrow. Instead, tonight, I wanted to focus on this individual and just honor him and give him the honor and the respect of not bringing the rest of it into this. So I really wanted to give a shout out to the First Responders Association of Alberta. They actually went a major step outside of the norm, and they held a official first responders funeral for the security guard. This is the first one that they have held for that region and for the association, but it is also the first time that anywhere in Canada, as far as I can find, that first responders have done this type of honorary funeral service and memorial for a civilian. So I thought that this was just an amazing honor for Harshandeep Singh. As I said, he's a 20-year-old security guard, and he had only been on the job for 3 days. Now, with the recent events on Sunday, his family, let me rephrase that, that was Saturday. They had a memorial, as I said, in Edmonton, where hundreds of people showed up. And with that said, there were some very kind words said about the individual, but also in terms of the First Responders Association. I just want to read the comments made by the president, Jerry Galliford. And he stated, and I quote, "This is the first time the Alberta First Responders Association has organized a service for a member, but also the first time that it has honored a civilian member like this. 33% of our members started out in security." So it hits deep for a lot of people, and that's why they are, why it says starting here today, but I assume that they meant standing there today. Mr. Singh is being remembered as a kind, selfless, ambitious man who moved to Canada a year and a half ago in search of a better life and better opportunities. And it should be noted that Mr. Singh came from a small community in Punjab. His family comes from a farming community where they really worked hard and sacrificed to send him to Canada in order to give him a better life. And this is something that he was striving towards. And I really wanted to also point out that the principles and values of Sikhi really push towards treating everyone as equals, to stand up and protect the people who cannot stand up and protect themselves, and about selfless service to community and to others. Now, here on the screen, you'll see an image of Mr. Harshandeep Singh. This is the young student who had a whole life ahead of him. And to look at, I think we might have the wrong image up there, but I will fix that. But he had his whole life ahead of him, and his family, when they saw him off at the airport a year and a half ago, were not thinking that he would be back in this circumstance. Instead, they were looking to see his smiling face come back, so proud and honored that he has received his education, and he wanted to make life better for his family's future. That is what it was all about. His family sacrificed to give him the opportunities that he grasped onto. He took them and ran in terms of his motivation and his abilities. He really worked hard at this. As I said, there were several people that spoke about him at the memorial, and one of the spokes individuals was representative of the Singh family, and his name is Gagandeep Guman, and he stated that this individual, Mr. Singh, was generous and selfless and always willing to help friends and family out. He was deeply rooted in the values of hard work, humility, and perseverance. He said that and noted that he came from a farming family, and he added that he sought education and opportunities not only to build a better future for himself, but to uplift his family and to help them achieve greater opportunities. And that is the story for so many of the foreign students that come to Canada, come to the UK, go to the US to get an education and to explore opportunities. That's what it's all about. They're not there for themselves. They're there for a family that has stood by them and really encouraged and gave them the tools to achieve their dreams. So as I said, I just want to point out some other bits about this gentleman. And he was known as a great friend and man with a giant heart for others. As I said, he was 20 years old from a farming community in Punjab. He's been in Canada for a year and a half. This was his third day on his security job, and again, working to protect others, to look out for those who may not be able to look out for themselves, giving selflessly of himself, putting himself in harm's way to allow others not to be in harm's way. He's an inspiration to, I would say, not only his family back home, but I would think to his entire community and to others here that he's come in contact with before this horrible event happened. And again, he was honored by the First Responders Association, and he will be returned home to his family in India. Right now, the coroner has finished their preliminary investigation and their autopsy, so now they can go ahead and make that journey. It should, in my opinion, encourage the Edmonton community to establish some type of scholarship or other program in his name to honor his life and his memory and his dedication to community. And I would love to see some type of scholarship in place for foreign students to allow another individual to come from India to try to make a better life for his family or her family. Right now, the owner of the building has the building up for sale for about $7.9 million. And I would love to see the building name changed to, maybe the Singh building or something like that, just to honor his life that he was protecting the citizens in that building. And also to add some type of a permanent memorial on the property to honor him as well, that his friends and others can actually attend and pay tribute, and also just to visit that memory of such an amazing young man who is gone way too soon. As I said, that the values of Sikhi are definitely, looks to me that these are values that he lived by, and tragically, unfortunately, he died practicing those standards, those cultural goals and values. And I just can't say enough about how this individual should be honored, remembered, and I'll go into more about the case itself tomorrow night, but tonight was all about honoring the memory of an amazing young man gone way too soon, Angus.
Yeah, it's what a tragedy. It's so sad, especially when a young person of any background loses their life so young. And I think it's just very typical of the, I would say the average Sikh who's left the Punjab and made an incredible life in the West. They built up a new life, they contributed. And the story of Sikhs, and of course, certainly here in the UK and indeed in North America, we've got second, third generation Sikhs who've more than integrated. They see themselves. In fact, I was actually talking to a soldier at the event in London 2-3 weeks ago, a Sikh soldier. He dedicated his life to the British Army, and we were having a long chat, and he said, look, I'm a British citizen. I'm third generation Sikh. My grandparents left the Punjab, but I see myself as British. I happen to wear a turban. I practice Sikhi. I'm a practicing Sikh, but I am British. And we of course, I'm saying this because it's just demonstrating how integrated the Sikhs have naturally become in all the societies across the diaspora, is that they integrate completely into our societies. They contribute enormously, almost without exception. And of course, they've been welcomed into our societies because of this deliberate integration. They've not segregated themselves. They've very deliberately followed a policy of integration to contribute, as again comes back to the basic tenets, the basic philosophy of Sikhi. And when a tragedy like this happens, it's almost doubly so, because these people have given so much to the societies within which they have arrived and entered and contributed, that it almost compounds that tragedy. So I think we'll be interested to follow this story a little bit more in detail about what actually happened here. But again, I think This story is more about, it's just a young man, just any young man from any background. It's just honouring somebody who has contributed to society. They're not just gone out there and got a job to make a living. They're actually gone into a service. Again, it falls part of Sabre. It's selfless service. Okay, it was a job, but ultimately it was in an area that was serving the community. Which again is such an important foundation of Sikhi. So yeah, James, I think there's not much more I can say about this other than it is a great tragedy, and people like this in the community who contribute so much to our societies as a whole need to be honoured for the contribution that they make.
Exactly, Angus. And as I said, tomorrow we'll have more on that. But tonight was all about honoring the memory of Harshandeep Singh. And for any of his friends that may be watching us, again, our hearts and our condolences go out to you sincerely.
Indeed. Okay. On that sad note, let's move on to my first story. And here in the UK, we've had, I reported some time ago, and in fact I actually interviewed a gentleman not that long ago actually, about a guy called Deepa Singh. He was detained last year, I think it was about this time last year actually, around Christmas time. He was detained at Gatwick Airport, one of our main London airports, and he was arrested. No, not was it arrested? Certainly, he was detained. I've got to be correct in my terminology, but he was certainly detained under Section 7 of the Anti-Terrorism Act that we have here in the UK. And this piece of legislation exists to give our security services the rightful powers to arrest and detain people that they are suspicious of, that they believe may be carrying out terrorist activity. Now, of course, in the West, we do have very powerful anti-terrorism laws because, of course, what has happened in recent years. And those laws are used, I wouldn't say sparingly, but they are certainly used under the scrutiny of a very accountable democratic society. Those laws are normally used, I would say, on a discretionary basis by our security services to ensure that they keep us safe, but at the same time balancing out civil liberties. However, and that's a big however, it has been brought to light recently that these laws are increasingly being abused by our security services towards the Sikh community. And sadly, once again, it would appear that our Sikh, as we call them here in the UK, our Sikh community have been targeted under these laws increasingly so. Now, Deepa Singh was detained a year ago under Section 7 of this Act. He was detained for several hours. He was brought into a room at Gatwick Airport and he was interrogated for several hours about his interests in India, about his political activism. He is, of course, a supporter of Jagtar Singh Johal, trying to get him out of prison. He was asked about his thoughts, his attitudes towards India, about his attitudes towards Khalistan, etc., etc. And one would actually have to ask, why was he asked these questions? He was a normal law-abiding citizen of the Sikh community going about his life, and he was detained under Section 7. And of course, his devices were taken off him. He was asked for his passwords. And I asked him, well, what happens if you refuse to give your passwords? He said, you were given the impression, you were made the fact that there was no doubt that if you didn't, you would be in an awful lot of trouble. So essentially, you had no choice but to hand over your passwords. So essentially, he was intimidated into handing over his passwords so that they could then go through his devices. Now, in the Guardian newspaper, one of our newspapers here in the UK, just over the weekend, it was reported that Section 7 is being used increasingly so against members of our Sikh community here in the UK. And it's been raised by Preet Kaur Gill MP, yes, one of our leading Sikh MPs here in the UK. She has raised this fact and raised this concern and asking the question, why are the Sikh community being increasingly targeted under Section 7 as they travel through British airports? Now, according to this article, it says British Sikhs are being stopped at airports and questioned about their attitudes towards India, according to Preet Kaur Gill. Preet is one of the most prominent Sikhs in Parliament. She's written to the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, to voice her concerns over a number of British Sikhs who she says have been stopped and questioned at length when re-entering the UK. The questions have centred on the decades-old dispute over whether Sikhs should be granted their own homeland in South Asia. Now, one has to ask this question: what on earth is it? What business is it of the British security services about whether Sikhs want their own homeland of Khalistan? Yeah. Yes, of course they've got to monitor it and keep an eye on it. But what right, what legal right do they have to start interrogating people in our community about Khalistan? It is none of your business. In my opinion, they can just say, it's none of your business. I'm not breaking any laws. I live in a democracy. What business is it of yours what my attitude is about Khalistan? Anyway, the article continues. Her comments reflect growing anger among British Sikhs about alleged harassment, either by or on behalf of the Indian government. And here we go. Here's really where it's all stemming from. It's influence from India once again. It's pressure from India. Why are our security services acting, going about their daily job under pressure from India? What business is it of our security services going about protecting British interests, then enacting India's interests? That's the key question here. They come amid an escalating diplomatic row between India and Canada over Hardeep Singh Nijjar, etc. Of course, we know the background about that. In Preet Kaur-Gill's letter to Yvette Cooper, which she sent in September, Gill raised the cases of a number of Sikhs who she said had contacted her with concerns about being stopped at British borders. And of course, one of those we know is Deepa Singh. She said one man had been stopped and held at Manchester Airport for several hours on his way back from a family holiday in Turkey, during which time he was asked what his views were on Sikhism, on the partition of India, and on Nijjar's death in Canada. Again, I just shake my head in disbelief. What business is this of British security services to know what this guy's opinion is of the partition of India in 1947? Again, this isn't about protecting British interests and protecting the security of Britain. This is a political thing. What this guy's opinion is of partition in 1947 has absolutely no bearing on protecting British interests, protecting British society. This is political pressure coming from India. It can come from nowhere else. It is astonishing, this. This is absolute proof that India is interfering in the politics and the running of the United Kingdom. She added that this guy had been roughly handled and that one of the officers had attempted to remove the man's turban, a symbol of his faith. Again, this is an absolute outrage. She said, the anecdotal evidence I have gives me cause for concern that law-abiding Sikhs are being targeted and that they are being subjected to inappropriate questioning that centres on their identity and religious beliefs for no apparent reason. This is religious persecution. This isn't the British security services acting as they should and lawfully. This is basically religious persecution. To ask for him to remove his turban breaks British law. There's no black and white, there's no ambiguity about this. This is absolutely black and white against British law. I'm sorry, but the British security services, much as I'm a great supporter of our services and our police forces, MI5 and MI6, I believe in what they do and they do a great job, but this is simple persecution. It is political and religious persecution. There's absolutely no ambiguity here. And one has to ask why they are not being held to account for this, why that this should not be escalated to the British government, saying why is our security services, and particularly our airports, persecuting our Sikh community. This is absolutely not right. And the article goes on. The practices I'm hearing about are leaving law-abiding Sikhs feeling victimised and unsafe. It's important, in order to maintain trust, that these processes are fair, impartial and treat all communities with the same dignity and respect. Absolutely right. The Home Office declined to comment. What a surprise. And the article goes on about the Khalistan movement. India's, of course, concern about what it calls extremism, and it also, this article refers to the movement has occasionally spawned acts of terrorism, such as the bombing of Air India Flight 182 in 1985. Yes, here we are, James, again. This narrative that India constantly spins that it was the Khalistan movement behind the bombing of Air India, when in fact evidence has emerged that in fact it was India's intelligence agencies behind that very bombing. So once again, this dreadful fake narrative gets brought up here. And it goes on about Delhi's concerns about Sikh nationalists have in recent years focused heavily on the Sikh diaspora, especially in North America and the UK, triggering tensions between India and foreign governments. Yes, indeed, it has absolutely created tensions. And the article also refers to the Sikh activist Avtar Singh Kandar, who it says died suddenly last June after complaining that Indian police were harassing him over the phone and threatening his family in Punjab. And at that time, Conservative MP Neil O'Brien wrote to James Cleverly, Cooper's predecessor, earlier this year expressing concerns over Kandar's death, urging the then Home Secretary to seek answers from West Midlands Police over their investigation into it. And, as we have reported previously, West Midlands Police's investigation wasn't investigation. The whole thing was buried and glossed over. And all being well, I will be interviewing Avtar Singh Kandar's barrister, who's trying to push for a judge-led inquiry. I'll be interviewing him hopefully in the new year and getting the real story of what's been going on into this very suspicious death of Avtar Singh Kandar, etc., etc. And then back to the article, Sikh community leaders say British Sikhs are now increasingly being stopped at UK airports under Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act 2000, and under that law, police can detain and question anyone travelling through an airport, port or train station to assess whether they are involved in terrorism, even if they have no grounds for suspicion. Gurpreet Singh Anand, the president of the Khalsa Jatha British Isles Gurdwara in London, said people are getting stopped and questioned without a solicitor being available. They are told they have to hand over their mobile phones and their social media passwords. They're asked very broad questions like, what are your views on Khalistan and India? It is very broad. So Gill wrote in her letter, the specific and unusual line of questioning at multiple airports gives me concern that this is part of a concerted strategy to target Sikhs. Teams of lawyers from the rich and powerful trying to stop us publishing stories. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, that's jumped to another story. So there, yeah, basically, so James, here we have once again more evidence that the British establishment is working hand in hand with the Indian establishment to persecute, to oppress, to harass, to intimidate the Sikh community because of this whole Khalistan movement. India fears the Khalistan movement. It is terrified about Sikh activism here in the UK and across the Western world. And so India is exerting its influence, which of course is very clearly very large upon the UK. India, for some reason, has an incredible hold over the British establishment. For some reason, the British establishment is weak. It is bowing once again to pressure from India. It appalls me as a British citizen who is deeply proud of my country. And I am absolutely horrified at this nation's weakness. Even after centuries of a huge empire where we span the globe, is our legacy now to bend and bow to the Indian government? Are we so weak now that we bow to pressure from the Indian government to oppress and persecute one of our most honoured, one of our most, in my opinion, powerful communities in this nation who have contributed so much to the growth, prosperity and future development of this country? Are we so weak as a nation that we allow our security services to bend to that pressure? Again, our once powerful security services are once honoured and treasured, and in my opinion, one of the leading security services on this planet. Are we again so weak that they bow to pressure, political pressure from a nation like India that is no longer a democracy? Are we again so weak that we allow our security services, our law enforcement services, to persecute one of our most highly contributing communities in this nation? I think that is absolutely appalling. I think it is a shame. I think it is a stain on our nation's integrity, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And I mean, we could go back a few decades, and that would be like, people traveling into Japan from Canada and them asking them, how do you feel about Quebec separation? How do you feel about the violence that took place in Quebec? You can ask all these stupid questions, but at the end of the day, the bigger concern is who is getting access to the answers? Who is getting access to the personal information of those being targeted and asked these questions? Is the India government being handed a whole dossier with the names of these individuals, their personal details, and their responses? I mean, what kind of a situation do you have where a foreign country such as the UK, Canada, the US would be asking these questions and targeting people in such a, to me, it's a horrific manner to disrespect a whole community just on behalf of another nation? That's just ridiculous, and I can't believe they're doing it. And it's really got to be looked into. And again, when they bring up the Air India event, again, that is where we need to see a new inquiry and investigation into all of the information, including that was not available in the 1980s when the original investigation happened, because I think that we're going to learn a lot more, and there are going to be a lot of people that can sleep better at night knowing that the truth was finally achieved in that horrific event.
And it's the hypocrisy as well that I just find embarrassing as a country, is that we are quite prepared as a nation to stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States and bomb democracy into other nations that we say need democracy because they're ruled by dictators or totalitarian regimes. And yet, here we are dealing with India, a country that is falling far away from democracy, that is actually falling towards totalitarianism. Yet we've got the Khalistan movement, which ultimately represents the ultimate in democracy. Why are we taking the side of India, what is fast becoming a totalitarian regime, against the Khalistan movement? We, in fact, should be supporting the Khalistan movement. We should be supporting and helping grow and nurture this movement amongst the diaspora, because that is what will engender democracy across the Indian subcontinent. So it's that hypocrisy I just find absolutely shameful as a nation. But anyway, James, let us move on from that story. Otherwise, we could rant for hours about it. But I find it absolutely shameful to keep having to come back to the same old story once again. Okay, let us move on then. And then let us move swiftly across to the Indian subcontinent. And let us go, in fact, to the Punjab itself. And again, this comes back, James, to a story that we have reported on many times in the past. This is, of course, the terrible story about pollution in the Punjab. And we've often talked about Punjab being the cancer capital of India because of this dreadful industrial pollution. Well, surprise, surprise, it is ongoing. It is getting worse. And it comes back to people power. The people have taken to the streets in the Punjab to protest once again about this basic human right to the right to clean water. Now, women and children over recent days were among hundreds arrested by Punjab police as they took to the streets during a recent Kalapani Damorcha. That translates, I believe, as a black water protest, which saw thousands demonstrate against ongoing government inaction towards mass industrial pollution of the Sutlej River. And again, we reported very often about this almost deliberate agenda just to allow the rivers of the Punjab to get polluted by big corporate interests and do nothing about it. Now, the largely Sikh-led movement demands the government act immediately to prevent the dumping of toxic waste into the Buddha Nulla Canal, which some say has been occurring for 40 years and is linked to disproportionate cancer rates across Punjab. And plans for further actions to stop this pollution will be announced in the next few days, including possibly acts outside of the law to circumvent the neglect, which is linked to corruption between state officials and wealthy industrialists, according to protest leaders. Yeah, so here again, it's bringing up this age-old story that it's the corporate industrialists who are polluting these rivers, and they're getting away with it through basic corruption, because the politicians, the only people who have the power to stop this happening, are taking backhanders, apparently, from the very industrialists who are polluting the rivers. And the people are rising up saying, look, enough, you've got to stop this corruption that is killing us by the hundreds and the thousands. Now, just to explain, the Buddha Nulla, or the Buddha Nala, is a seasonal water stream which runs through the Malwa region of Punjab. After passing through the highly populated Ludhiana district, it drains into the Sutlej River, a tributary of the Indus River. I want to show you a video of what this looks like, just so you can actually visualise how bad this is. Look at this. I mean, look at the colour of that water. That is flowing through the Punjab. And people are taking water from that river for domestic use, to drink, to cook with, to wash with. Let me show you another video. Again, this is unfortunately I don't speak Punjabi, so well, hopefully our Punjabi speakers can maybe let us know what they think of this video. Have a look at this one.
मेरा निजी मसला नहीं है हाल देखो पंजाबियों देख रहे हैं ਇਹ ਕਾਲੇ ਪਾਣੀ ਦੀ ਸਜ਼ਾ ਕਰਤੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪੰਜਾਬੀਓ ਹਾਲ ਦੇਖ ਲਓ ਆ ਸਾਰਾ ਗੰਦ ਜ਼ਹਿਰ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਆ ਆ ਪਾਣੀ ਪੀਨੇ ਹੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆ ਸਤਲੁਜ ਦੇ ਪਵਿੱਤਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਂ ਦਰਿਆਵਾਂ ਚੋਂ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਵਿੱਤਰ ਦਰਿਆ ਹੈ ਉਹਦਾ ਕਾਲਾ ਪਾਣੀ ਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਆ ਬੋਤਲਾਂ 'ਚ ਦਿਖਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਇਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਇੰਨੀ ਕਿ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਗੰਦੀ ਬਦਬੂ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਖੜ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਪਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਇਹ ਹਾਲ ਸਤਲੁਜ ਵਰਗੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਦਰਿਆ ਦਾ ਪੂਜਾ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਪਵਿੱਤਰ ਦਰਿਆ ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਪੂਜਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ.
Now, I'll admit, I have absolutely no idea what he's talking about from the Punjabi, but I think the message, you don't need to understand Punjabi to see the message going on there. It is very clear that water is deeply, deeply polluted. Now, around 1,500 people from Rajasthan, that's downstream from all of this, reached Ludhiana recently and alleged that the dirt and black chemical water in Ludhiana's Buddha Nala gets mixed in the Sutlej and later reaches Rajasthan downriver, because of course they're suffering downriver from all this. After drinking the water, hundreds of people in Rajasthan have fallen ill. Now, the CPCB, that's the Central Pollution Control Board, has pinned the blame for extreme water pollution in Ludhiana's Buddha Nala on the dumping of toxic discharge by dyeing units. This is the dyeing industry. They're pointing the finger of guilt at the dyeing industry. So Punjab's Chief Minister Bhagwant Mann in September this year announced a 3-phase multi-pronged programme to clean the Buddha Nala in Ludhiana. Now, there's been apparently a very active activist, Laka Sidana. He's led a lot of these protests. And there's videos flying around the social media about his protests that he's led. And he actually got arrested after a lot of these protests. And he took to the streets, loads of people, as they tend to do, poured into the streets in support of his protest against this dreadful pollution, this deadly pollution. He was detained after the protest, but he was finally released. But the very fact that he was even detained speaks volumes about what's going on in the Punjab. And he shared his views on the detention of activists and individuals who are going to participate in the Kalipani Da Morcha campaign in Ludhiana. And of course, this campaign aims to block the outlets of dyeing industries to curb pollution in Buddha Nala in Ludhiana. So he's taking direct action, and his supporters are taking direct action to deliberately block these outlets, to stop this poison pouring into their rivers. And unfortunately, James, it comes back to all the key problems here in the Punjab. Firstly, it is the basic pollution of the most basic fundamental human right, the water resource, this human right to access to clean water. That is being blocked off by these industries. And then, of course, it comes back to the corruption that is rife across India, that is rife in the Punjab, where the very people, the only people who can stop this, who have the power to stop the people of the Punjab being killed by industry, they are not doing so. They are not taking action because they are clearly corrupt, and they are taking backhanders from the industrialists to stop them taking action against these very people. It's a very sad story, but it says an awful lot about what's going in the Punjab, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And I mean, you look at the carcinogens, you look at the toxins, you look at the other impacts of this pollution on the human body, not only of those who are consuming it now, but at the future birth defects, the future children that are going to be impacted by the health challenges that the parents face. And this is just not acceptable for any country, especially one that calls themselves a developing nation that wants to change that to a developed nation within a very short period of time. And with the levels of corruption, which we've spent a lot of time looking at, Angus, of the textile and the dyeing industries there, this is just not acceptable. Again, a plain and simple example of how India is failing its own people through the corruption and allowing things to just continually get past the Central Pollution Control Committee.
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking that that it's allowed to happen. But as you rightly said, the legacy of this will be generations to come. Is that these toxins do have a generational impact, as you said, in birth defects and things like that. So even if it stops today, the damage will continue for generations. It's absolutely appalling. So, and again, also the fact that even those who are protesting against it, trying in desperation to stop it, are being arrested by Indian law enforcement and locked up and detained just for daring to stand up against this corruption and this basically corporate murder of the local population. So, okay, James, let us then move on to our comments section. And last week's podcast was with Dr. Bakshi Singh Sandhu. It was an interesting podcast about again, it always comes back to the Khalistan movement. And it was how the Khalistan movement have gone to the United Nations and they are laying out their legal case of why legally they have the right to secede from India. And of course, one of the key elements in that legal argument is that India has not been respecting the human rights of Sikhs within the Punjab. And of course, the evidence, I mean, we talk about it on a daily basis, so the evidence is clearly there, and it was set out in front of the United Nations. And Dr. Sandhu, in our interview, and do watch this interview, it's very interesting, he sets out in great detail, going through all the various conventions, the clauses in the United Nations Convention over Human Rights that was established in 1948, and he went through legally all the legal clauses that India have breached that therefore establishes that legal case for Khalistan. And we had a lot of reaction to that video on both sides of the argument, as it turns out. Nativity was one who said, I think you should already set up some institutions like a judiciary, a parliament, election commission, etc., etc. So what Nativity is saying is that you need to get your plans in place. You need to have all the infrastructure of society already in place and invite Sikhs, the Khalsa, to come up with their political roadmap. Well, I Love Puneet Dajoka came back and said, look, thank you, but this clearly you don't have an understanding of how the Khalsa Raj functions. And I love Puneet says they're raising many questions like this, but basically he's saying, look, don't worry, we have our gurus, we have Waheguru Guruji, and they set out in their writings about how the Khalsa Raj will operate. And more importantly, enemies don't need to know everything. Sikhs already have a plan. They have all the answers. Answers are to be found on a need-to-know basis, internal to Sikhi, not outside. So what he's rightly saying is, look, actually, don't worry. The plans are already in place. I know this for a fact myself, and I've talked to enough people within the community at a very high level, is that yes, the plans are there, ready to roll out. The social infrastructure, all the basic mechanisms to operate an independent state are in place. The plans are there, ready to roll out. All we need now is to get the legal go-ahead to secede from India, and Khalistan will be established. Yes, indeed, to establish a new nation takes an enormous amount of resources, of plans, etc. But I would say those plans are very, very well underway. Is that when it happens, and it will happen hopefully in the foreseeable future, is that there is this enormous machine ready to put into gear and roll out Khalistan and the infrastructure of Khalistan. So as you rightly say, it is on a need-to-know basis. India is very powerful. India has many people acting as agents amongst the Sikh diaspora, trying to find out this information, but it is should we say, a very closely guarded secret. That is information on a very much need-to-know basis. You're absolutely right. Niraj Kumar also comes back on that same thread to say, and look, what's your plan for the Hindus, all the other communities? If you allow them to have an opinion, Khalistan will be restricted. Oh, sorry, back to the Jats. If you allow them to have an opinion, Khalistan will be restricted to just Tehran. That's a small region in the Punjab. Do you plan to kill them or just now allow them to vote? They'll never accept Akal Takht as supreme. So I think, yeah, the question really here that Niraj is raising is, look, what about all these other communities? They might not want to live under what you call an Akal Takht as a supreme government. Well, I don't think you understand what the Khalsa what Khalistan will stand for or how it will be governed. It will be governed in the same way that the Sikh Empire was governed. It will be a deeply diplomatic process. Yes, on the face of it, it will be run under Sikh philosophy. Well, it will be run under Sikh philosophy, but that philosophy allows a deeply democratic social model to operate so that all these minorities will be welcomed. They will have a say in the governance. They will be involved in the governance. It won't just be a theocracy, as many believe it will be. It won't be just a one religious theocracy where, in your opinion, the Akal Takht will reign supreme. It will not. The Khalsa Raj will operate under what's called a Panj Padani, which is a model which has worked in the past under a democratic model, and it will work under the Khalistan government, and it allows for everybody within Khalistan to have a voice. Everybody is treated equals, and so much so that minorities will want to move to Khalistan because they will see what a wonderfully positive model of democracy that Khalistan will be, James.
Absolutely, Angus, and that's something that we've talked about before, is how there was a representation of all faiths and all groups at the table when it came to the Sikh Empire. There were the Muslims, there were the Dalits, there were the Christians. They all had a place at the table, and that is one of the foundational principles of Sikh, is that everybody is equal. And that doesn't matter what religious background or beliefs that you come from. And again, it is so important. And it's also just with the independence to obtain that, it is really difficult to get the final say. But a part of that comes to international relations, because there's no cut and dry process to get the independence recognized by all nations. So again, it is all about showing through leadership of diplomacy, of a diplomatic approach, peaceful process, and just international cooperation. Leave the violence out of it, leave the threats out of it, and show that Khalistan is going to be an amazing place of leadership and showing the world how different cultures can come together and just live in harmony, Angus.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these comments just come from simple ignorance without realising they clearly just don't understand what Khalistan will actually stand for and how it will be governed and how that model, this Panj Padani, operates. It is designed as an ultimately democratic process. As I say, under the Sikh philosophy, everybody is treated as equals. So when people criticise it, they need to understand, and this is where we come in, is we're trying to educate people who fear it. Don't fear it. It is actually a wonderful model in many ways. It's actually even a better model than our own democracies here in the West. So, okay, let's move on.
Is a great reason for these comments to come in, because we get the opportunity to explain it and to discuss it. So thank you for that comment.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, the Pakistan argument came in a lot after this discussion. Kids Account says, great, Pakistan fully supports Khalistan. Absolutely, and as well they should. And I Love Pinny comes back saying not necessarily. Anyone has any regard for human rights, they should be supporting Sikhs in Khalistan. In other words, basically, if you believe in human rights, then you should support Khalistan. And Vinny Chauhan comes back and says, not many support terrorists, only Pakistan, who are the chief sponsors. Well, that's, I would say, a slightly blanket accusation, which is really unfounded. I think what you're trying to claim there is that you say basically Pakistan supports terrorists. And I think Pakistan as a nation might be slightly offended by that. Yes, there are Islamic extremists who pour over the border from places like Afghanistan. And Pakistan government are doing their absolute best to drive out any of that extremism. But I believe, in fact, your comment, Vinny Chauhan's comment after the next comment, where Maslam says, Dr. Saif Salam from Lahore, Pakistan, wish you the earliest freedom from beasts of India. So again, this is support coming from over the border in Pakistan for Khalistan. And Vinny Chauhan comes back in there and says, yes, Khalistan with Lahore as capital. So again, all these comments are pointing around the fact it's all around the complexities that actually, ironically, it was the British created these complexities when in partition. They divided the Punjab down the middle into Pakistan's side and into India's side. And partition actually created this dreadful situation, the legacy of which now really just comes through all these comments where, again, it's sown division, where we've got the Punjabi side and we've got the Indian side. And the Punjabi side, of course, is essentially run under the Muslim nation of Pakistan. And the Indian side still operates under, obviously, the Indian government. Sikhs have tried to maintain their autonomy, but unfortunately, the Indian government has stamped their stand on it. And, and this has generated all these arguments between the Pakistan side. And it's also allowed the critics of the whole Khalistan movement, it's allowed Hindutva, essentially, to get into that crack between Pakistan and India, and to try and engender this false narrative that somehow it's Pakistan and the ISI, the Pakistan Intelligence Services, are behind this whole Khalistan movement. And again, we see it regularly in these comments, this division, this deliberate division between Pakistan and India, and they're trying to create this division in the Khalistan argument as well. And the final comment of these is from Ritvik Dev, who says, he stopped listening after Dr. Sandy said Sikhs did not attack the people in the temple. Videos were shown of Sikhs attacking with big sticks. Even the Sikh police were hitting. Well, I didn't see that. Pure propaganda, Satlaj. Well, I think if you're referring to the video where we saw outside the Mandir in Canada, I think that's the video you're referring to, of Sikhs attacking Hindus. Actually, yes, and I have to hold my hand up and say yes, Sikhs were attacking, but you only saw part of the video where Hindutva clearly deliberately did not show the first part of that video where the Sikhs themselves were attacked by the Hindu mob. So they did what any normal human being would do. They acted, they retaliated. And those big sticks you refer to were the flags. They were the Khalistan flags that they were peacefully standing there with. They were standing there deliberately, peacefully protesting against the Mandir, and it was the Hindu mobs who provoked them. So they did all they could do as they reacted with their flags. That was all that they came to hand. So that's what that was about, I'm afraid.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's exactly true. Angus, I've lost my video, but I'm still here with you. And that's something that people have to really understand, is that there was a lot of misinformation out there in social media, and unfortunately, that spread more like wildfire than the truth did.
So when Rick Div talks about pure propaganda, unfortunately, the real propaganda there has come from, once again, that great source of propaganda. That's the Hindutva IT cells, and that's what we're constantly trying to fight against. That's why we exist, to try and show you the other side of the story. And then we had a load of comments after our show last week. We talked about the Khalistan movement at the United Nations. So Vinod Damji said, what did the British do to the Punjab after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh? Yeah, absolutely. This is true, actually. When the British took the throne from Duleep Singh, who was only a child at the time, and took away the Kohinoor diamond from him, they brought him to England, they converted him to Christianity. He lost his kingdom, and he lost his family. He was given a pension as remuneration. Total hypocrites. Yes, you're absolutely right. This was a terrible story, actually, and we have talked about this in the past. This was the final Maharaja. He was a young boy at the time, and the British took him back to the UK. He was feted by Queen Victoria. He was gifted an enormous estate in East Anglia. That's in the east of England. He was essentially bribed by the British government and Queen Victoria, saying, here is a British estate, we will treat you to riches, we will treat you as part of the aristocracy. All you need to do in return is to essentially give up your legacy of being the final Maharaja of the Sikh Empire. And he did, of course. He was a young boy. He lost contact at the time with his mother. He did actually sneak back to India to meet his mother once again, finally. But it is a very, very tragic story, and it just demonstrates the ruthlessness of the British Empire, which is actually why the British Empire was so successful. It was ruthless in the way it managed its empire. So yes, hands up, I'm not guilty, but my forefathers were guilty of that. Sadly, yes, it was hypocrisy of the British at that time. And finally, as a last blow, they allowed it to be partitioned without consultation, or the implication millions died. Yes, absolutely. And I refer back to previous comments about partition. Partition was a terrible thing that happened. Millions lost their lives of all sides, not just Sikhs, but Hindus as well. Christians, many people across India lost their lives in that terrible time. It was a terrible time. The British were to blame. Not just the British, though. The Brahmins were involved in this handover. The British had to get out quickly because Indian politics at the time, if you dig into what was going on at the time, actually it was all falling apart. There was an awful lot of infighting happening within Indian politics. The Brahmins realised that this was a time of opportunity. They stepped in. They essentially pushed the British out. And they, knowing that this was their opportunity to take control, essentially take colonial control from the British for themselves. And they were behind a lot of what happened during partition as well. They were behind, as much as the British, they were guilty of what happened to the Sikhs at the time. So it's not black and white, Vinod Damji. Yes, I hold the hands up of the British to what happened. Indeed, the British are guilty of this, but it's not just the British. It was the Brahmins also equally as guilty here in what happened in 1947, James. As always, it's not black and white, it's shades of grey.
Exactly. And, we can sit here and look at blame from way back, but the important thing to keep in mind is where we're going in the future and where Khalistan is going to be in the future. And again, I think they'll be a leader for that whole region and really make a positive influence and change for all areas of India, Pakistan, the whole region there.
And our next comment from Azad Singh comes back to, in fact, actually what we've been talking about in today's show. Corruption and bribery are very deep-rooted here in every department. Thanks for highlighting the serious issue. It may not have any effect on any departments. No, we won't. Our small voice won't have an effect on its own, but hopefully it's when we combine all our voices and we combine grassroots pressure, we combine the thousands pouring onto the streets in Ludhiana and across Punjab, that is the only way that things will ever change. Is it not, James? It has to come from the grassroots. It has to come from voices like ourselves to help rally the people to push upwards against the corruption.
Absolutely, Angus, and that's where it is so important for our viewers to support our cause in terms of the fact that you can share, you can like, you can invite your family and friends to also subscribe to the channel, because the more people that are sharing and taking part in the conversation, the further that conversation and those voices can resonate.
Indeed. And affordability for you comes up with the comment pointing to the fact that all this going on has been carried out with the approval and blessings of Mr. Modi and the BJP. So you can't expect them to take any action against themselves. You're absolutely right. Indeed, and nothing can change until the BJP and Hindutva and indeed the RSS, who are so deeply embedded in Indian politics, they are removed. Who knows? One day they will be. We'll certainly hope so. All that the Sikh community can do is essentially take everything into their own hands and break away and secede and just set up their own homeland. And it's quite likely then, once they do, that many people will emigrate from what's left of India to Khalistan, realising that it represents a much better society. But you rightly say, thank you for this. This is an excellent channel spreading the truth. Thank you for that, and we do our best. Please raise your voices for the persecuted Christians in India too. Absolutely right. In Manipur, how many churches have been burnt to the ground? I think it's over 500 now have been burnt to the ground. Hindu radicals want to wipe out all minorities in India, targeting mainly Christians, Sikhs and Muslims. Indeed they do, and we report on this on a regular basis, James. We report on how all minorities, not just Sikhs, but indeed Christians and Muslims and Jains, indeed, all minorities in India are targeted by this. They're all victims of this Hindu extremism.
Absolutely, and we talk about it all the time.
Thank you for your comment, affordability. You're absolutely right with that. And our final set, Growal says, we missed you, James, yesterday. Welcome back. Looking forward to another great show. You were missed, as many people pointed out.
Thank you very much, everyone. And back and better than ever. Okay, that might be a stretch.
Well, it's lovely to be missed. And Happy You says, it's great to see your programme, Mr. James and Mr. Scott. Your smiling great programme makes my day great always. Well, how lovely, James, that we are making people's day.
Exactly. And they make ours by throwing these comments up there. So it's a two-way street, Angus.
Indeed it is. And in fact, you and our audience make our day by your comments. Your supportive comments and all your comments that you send in really do make our day. It makes us believe, and it justifies why we work every day on this programme, why we bring it to you every day, because we feel validated and we feel deeply supported by all these wonderful comments. So thank you to each and every one of you. This is just one of so many comments that have been so wonderful and supportive. So thank you for all those. They really do mean an awful lot to us. And Desh Khalistan says, thanks, Mr. Angus. My reason to see your show is to learn English. Good heavens. I don't know how good my English is. I do my best, James. But certainly, and in fact, this isn't the first comment to have said this, is that people across our audience do watch our show to help them learn English, and particularly amongst the young generation.
And that's why we try to keep the cursing down, because we don't want you to learn the wrong words.
Indeed, absolutely. Let that be a lesson to us, James, that we must keep our language as clean and as good as possible. Because there are those who certainly wouldn't want to learn some of our bad language. So we will continue, hopefully, to provide that service. So thank you, Desh Khalistan, for your comment. And the final comment of the day goes to Robbie Jojo. And, well, we often talk about the Sikh community, but we also talk about Christmas. And Robbie says, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Well, let us say that. It's probably very early to say this. We're almost there. I think we've only got about 10 days to go for Christians, any of our Christian audience. But yes, let me also pass on a very, very Merry Christmas and a massively prosperous New Year to everybody in our audience. And of course, as our final show before Christmas, don't worry, we will still be broadcasting right up until before Christmas, but we will wish you officially a Merry Christmas. But let this be the first opportunity, James, to wish our audience a very Merry Christmas.
I'm not saying it now. What's going to keep them coming back till Christmas if I don't keep them anxious for those words?
Indeed. Well, let's just say it will get bigger and better the closer.
In case you miss it, Merry Christmas and have a very safe and prosperous New Year. If you are not with us for the rest of the season, by all means, stay safe.
Indeed, and on that wonderful note, we will draw Perspectives to close for another day. Please do not forget to keep your wonderful comments coming in. Thank you so much for the many hundreds that have been pouring in after our recent videos. Really appreciated. Thank you for those. Thank you for the supportive ones. But do, of course, keep those really interesting educational comments, highlighting things that we might not know about, or even your very own perspectives on the stories that we do cover. Don't forget, you can, of course, email us directly at message@satellage.tv.com if there's something you'd like to bring to our attention, as many of you have indeed been doing so. Thank you for those. But in the meantime, we must draw things to a close. Thank you very much for watching once again. It is a goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.